December 11th marks 20 years since China joined the World Trade Organization. The country's international trade has grown sixfold since its accession to the global trading body in 2001. China's membership in the WTO was a milestone in the country's reform and opening up. Here's a look at how it happened.
I thank Mr. Girard on behalf of the Ministerial Conference. So agrees.
On December the 11th, 2001, China became a member of the World Trade Organization in Doha. With 164 member states, the WTO is the largest international economic organization dealing with the rules of trade. The WTO membership opened up China's market for more international trade and investment and allowed Chinese exports into the world economy. The country's service sector was considerably liberalized and restrictions on retail, wholesale and distribution ended. Foreign investment was allowed into banking, financial services, insurance and telecommunications.
China became the world's largest recipient of foreign direct investment last year. More than 1 million foreign enterprises have set up in the country. One executive tells us what's changed since China's accession to the WTO.
I was here back in 2002, so I was here to witness those multinational companies growing at a rapid rate. Before opening up in the WTO, it was more just setting up branch offices or setting up initial investment companies, but it was much smaller scale. Nearly 40 years ago when we first arrived, we just had one office, and now we have more than 10. We've been able to grow our business and hire a lot more people and have a much bigger presence in China in that time.
And now in the studio with me is my colleague Zheng Yibing, and he'll be telling us about the changes in China and the global economy since WTO accession.
Well, yes, the changes are profound, benefiting China and both developing and developed countries. In 2 decades, China has become the world's second largest economy. Its share of economic output in the world economy has increased from 4% in 2001 to about 17% last year. Living standard of the Chinese people have improved, and access to goods and services have expanded since accession to the WTO.
I think there have been great changes. For example, there are many imported fruits and foods I never saw before. But now I see them in supermarkets and their prices are acceptable.
In terms of trade, China's exports have increased by more than 7 times, while its imports have increased close to 6 times. China's paid significant attention to imports. For 12 consecutive years, China has been the second largest import market in the world. Evidence of this is a hosting of the China International Import-Expo for 4 straight years. Over the past 2 decades, China has fulfilled its WTO entry commitments, lowering its tariff level from 15.3% to 7.5%. That's lower than its initial commitment of 9.8%. This is in line with China's promise to further open its market and link with other countries. In the services sector, China promised to open up 100 subcategories in 9 main categories in 2007, including finance, insurance, security, and telecoms. The fact is, China has opened nearly 120 subcategories. This is more than double the average number of sectors opened up by earlier WTO members. Now, with the WTO facing reform, China is pushing for changes that ensure fairness and protect developing countries' interests. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Zheng Yibing. My colleague Tian Wei spoke with Zhang Xiangcheng, the Deputy Director of the World Trade Organization, and he was involved in the lengthy negotiations over China's accession to the WTO. And he also refuted the claim that China had not fulfilled its obligations.
Did China really carry out what it promised? Because these days, with China's economy becoming ever bigger and more influential, some have been accusing China of not implementing what China earlier promised. How do you see accusations like this?
Some members mentioned this, that China's performance in the past 3 years during the review period, the performance has gap with their expectation. So you know that the term they use is expectation. For me, as a former negotiator, the WTO is a contract, it's a legal document, it's about obligation and right in black and white. For the legal document, for the commitment we made, we fully implemented it through reducing the tariff, eliminating the quota the import license, and liberalizing 100 sectors of services. So expectation is about a subjective feeling of the people. You can have different expectation for one people or one country, but it's not necessarily the commitment and the legal obligation of China.
China's chief negotiator for WTO accession says many industries in China were initially concerned over the move to join the global trading scheme. They felt that it would destabilize the country. Long Yongtu was speaking to China Media Group.
Back then, not all Chinese people understood the meaning of China's accession to the WTO, so there was a lot of concern among the public. The biggest concern was its potential impact on China's auto and agricultural industries. As the automotive industry chain is very long and involves nearly 1 million jobs, a lot of people were worried about the complex implications. Minor problems in the auto sector could ripple through the country's entire manufacturing industry. Another major concern was around the agricultural industry. For China, agriculture has always been a sector that needs extra care, and many views agricultural stability as a sign of social stability and economic stability. Sloppiness is not tolerated. I remember when then Premier Zhu Rongji was making the final deal with the U.S. representative in November 1999. One of the bargaining chips he had been hesitant to use was whether to free up the franchise right of fertilizers. At that time, everyone was very cautious about agriculture. But after 20 years of development, I think the agricultural industry in China has moved on a path of scale, standardization, and marketization. Meanwhile, China's annual car production volume has also jumped from only 70,000 to over 27.5 million now. I think this is a tremendous development and a great change.
Well, we have Liu Baocheng back with us once again. He's the Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Mr. Liu, how has China's accession to the WTO transformed its economy as well as the world's?
Well, by assuming the membership of WTO, China has gone through tremendous amount of changes in that Chinese industrial structure has improved to a great deal. And there was really worry by joining WTO, figuratively, Chinese businesses, how can they dance with wolves? Well, actually, we introduced competition that has really spurred the Chinese growth instead of eliminating Chinese industries. And nowadays, look at the garment industry, look at the textile industry, the home appliances industries. So it used to suffer a great deal, but it really beat the world with the right type of competitiveness. And right now, as Zheng Yibing has mentioned, that Chinese, the share of the global GDP and also share in global trade has increased to such an extent that now we register like 4.5 and even more trillion US dollars in terms of global trade. So this really, more subtly brings China a better look and a better vision of the entire world. By collaborating in the world, we are able to benefit and we are able to contribute in the same time.
So China has, of course, rapidly developed. Now, according to the World Bank, China's GDP per capita was over 10,000 US dollars in 2020. And critics are saying that China should no longer be considered a developing country under the WTO. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, World Bank typically, they calculate GDP per capita in terms of the PPP approach, the purchasing power parity, which is rather subjective. Actually, by Chinese official statistics, we just get through the threshold of 10,000 US dollars per capita, and in the meantime, we can see that China has very unbalanced growth. And in the coastal regions and in those mega cities, we do see that we are able to join the rank of a developed country. But if we travel further into the suburban areas, the rural areas, the hinterland areas, China is still a very typical developing country. So only look at the type of congregated GDP. That doesn't reflect the whole picture. And plus, as Mr. Xiang Chen has mentioned, that WTO is really contractual based. So therefore, expectation, obligation are totally different things. So therefore, China has fulfilled its obligation and delivered even more. For example, we promised with WTO that we're going to have almost tariff-free for those least developed countries to import their goods into China, be it consumer goods, be it industrial goods and raw materials, etc. So this is additional commitment China has really made. But that doesn't mean that China is not really fulfilling its obligation. So therefore, to remain a developing country, to continue its reform, and to continue to contribute, it's a will of the Chinese people, but obligation provides the bottom line.
Well, the Chinese economy does rely a fair bit on state subsidies, and Mr. Liu, some WTO members are saying that the organization should reinforce rules on this. What's China's position on WTO reforms?
Well, to have more tightened rules in the gameplay of all members is part of the WTO reform process. So China is really there to welcome this new change. So to bring better transparency and also better accountability, this is something that China would also expect and China would also like to do. But in the meantime, we have to look at the individual clauses of the WTO, for example, to remove the tariff, to remove the tax imposed on those, the domestic goods when they really export through the domestic custom house. That is something that is permissible by the WTO. So a lot of confusion is really taking place over there. Therefore, the say free competition and a fair competition, has a relationship with the subsidy, whether the subsidy is fair or not, whether it's transparent or not. So that's a question. It's not really the subsidy per se that is really in question. So therefore, China will continue to improve its transparency and accountability. But in the meantime, China shall not be deprived of its own legitimate power to continue to support the export drive of the Chinese companies, be it manufacturer-based or service-based.
Well, Mr. Liu, thank you so much once again. Really appreciate it. Liu Baocheng with the University of International Business and Economics.